Perfect. Okay, so when we talk about figs, I've shared the screen already, but I guess I should have waited to share it. But where's the first time that you would think about figs?
The Garden of Eden, perhaps covering themselves with fig leaves.
Exactly, covering themselves with fig leaves. And what's interesting is this idea of requiring clothes, because obviously before then, Adam and Eve didn't require any clothes, and there was nothing immodest or wrong about the way that they were. That was just the way that they'd been created, and that was natural. And suddenly they sinned, and then they needed to cover themselves. But what's really interesting is if we actually look at the verses, it's literally the first thing that they do after they sin. So let's look at these together. And we're in, so like we said, we're in Bereshit right at the beginning. So we've got, and the women saw that the tree was good for eating. And the words in brackets are an explanation rather than a translation, but they're an explanation that really adds quite a lot of depth to what we're saying. And I'm trying to figure out how to, maybe I'll minimize this just so that I can read the words easier. And the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and that it was desirable for the eyes. And obviously we're talking about here the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that the tree was auspicious for knowing good and evil. And she took of its fruit and she ate, and she gave also to her husband with her, so that she not die and he live and marry another. Which is interesting. That's obviously an explanation rather than what it actually says. And he ate. Okay. And then straight after that we've got, and the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. Interesting, if you look at the explanation in brackets, we've got bereft of their one mitzvah. That's what made them feel naked, according to this explanation, is, you know, the one thing they were meant to do, they didn't do. And they put together fig leaves and made themselves girdles. The tree of knowledge was a fig tree, wherein they offended, they were amended. Now, what's very interesting, if you remember, if we go back a few weeks till before Pesach, which feels like an eternity ago, if we go back to then, we spoke about the idea that what they ate from was wheat. And obviously there's lots of different explanations of what it was exactly, this fruit that they ate from. But for this week, because our week this week is about figs, we're going to be looking at the explanation that talks about figs. And this is in the Gemara. Rab Nehemiah says it was a fig tree, as with the object with which they were corrupted and sinned, they were rehabilitated, as it is stated, and they sewed together fig leaves and made for themselves loincloths or girdles, as it explains it. Okay. So I think this is the first place that we've got to consider, this idea that it's with what they sinned, that was what they kind of repented, or that's what they corrected their sin with. So if we say that the tree that they sinned from was fig leaves, that's why it makes sense then that was how they erred, and that's how they're going to correct what they had done wrong. So what is it, this idea of suddenly, well, actually in the verse, because in the verse in the brackets of this text that I quoted, you've got the explanation as well. It shows that what it was that they were feeling, that their embarrassment came from the fact that they had done this sin. They'd been given one commandment. It was the one thing they shouldn't do wrong, was to eat from the tree. They ate from it, and that gave them this sense of shame. But before that point, there was no sense of shame, right? They didn't have an issue with the fact that they did or didn't have clothes on. And it is a little bit like, if you think about a very young child, they don't have a sense of there being any issue of, you know, you take them out of the bath and they're happy to run around. However, they don't have a sense of embarrassment of who they're in front of. That's something that we develop as, you know, it's part of child development, isn't it? But it wasn't something that was innately present. So are clothes a good thing, or are clothes something that actually it's a necessary evil almost? And I guess, you know, it depends who you talk to and how they feel about it. If you look at the, you know, probably billion pound industry of fashion, they're definitely not going to say to you that clothes are a necessary evil. What's the phrase that we use when we describe clothes? Clothes make the man, right? Or the woman, right? clothes are so important in terms of telling us about a person. Even we were listening last night to Roberts and Frieda talking about the army, the uniform you wear, and the color of the beret, and the different things, you know, talking about VE Day as well. That says so much about you as a person. So we now live in a reality where actually clothes are so important, and they do say so much about us. Very interesting part of kind of mental health awareness, which I think is so important right now, is this idea that if you get up and you get dressed in the morning and you get dressed into things, you know, you get dressed properly, and it's so tempting not to right now, you know. I mean, we for sure have, you know, pajama days, and that's fine, but it's, if it becomes into pajama weeks and pajama months, just because you're not seeing lots of people, you know, that really does affect your way of being and your way of thinking. This idea of getting up in the morning and getting dressed, it's part of us as people, isn't it? It really says so much about the way we feel, the way we look, our attitude, is this being ready, being dressed and ready. And what's interesting as well is that clothing, even in our Torah, is really, really significant. So we've got, as an example, when we look at the Kohen Gadol, we were just reading about that in, I believe, last week's Parsha. I think Acharei Mot was talking about what the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol wore. And I don't know where it is actually, but we have this beautiful book about the Mishkan, and it shows the intricacy and the detail of the clothing that the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol wore, and obviously of all the fabrics that you had in the Mishkan, but the attention to detail, and you know, you had the colors of blue and the pomegranates and the bells. And actually, when we talk about pomegranates, we'll look at the Me'il with the bells and the pomegranates, because that clothing is very significant. But this idea of being clothed comes all the way from the beginning of time. And once we entered this new reality of post-sin humanity, so the way that the world was created was before Adam and Eve sinned, that was the way that the world could have continued forever. And then what happened was Adam or Chava ate from the tree and then gave it to Adam to eat as well. And, you know, you can decide who you want to blame, whether it was the serpent's fault, whether it was the woman's fault, whether it was the man's fault. There's lots of different ways of looking at who exactly did something wrong. But straight away, we see that clothes are an integral part of the new reality. And once you already are entering this new reality, then clothes are no longer something that's negative. Clothes are something that's positive. The second they enter the post-sin world, which is the world we now live in, and it really is a completely different world. It's a world where no longer is temptation and the desire to do something bad external to us. So before Adam and Eve sinned, you had the idea of the nachash, the snake, was something external. As soon as they sinned, it became internal. And now we all have a voice in our head that sometimes tells us to do the right thing and sometimes tells us to do the wrong thing, right? We all have that inner voice, the voice of good and the voice of bad. You know, I'm thinking about, you know, some of the cartoons when they sometimes show like Dennis the Menace or something, you know, what's the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do. That is the new reality that we're now all in. And one of the most showing signs of this new reality is definitely clothes. And it's interesting because even in our morning prayers, we reflect the significance and the centrality of clothes, right? We talk about Malbish Arumim. One of the things that we say, thank you to Hashem, one of the first things we say is for clothing the naked, right? That's one of the first words that we say. And actually, if you look at this verse, so the second verse, in the Hebrew, Vayedu ki arumim, they knew that they were naked. That's what the wording that we use is Malbish Arumim, who clothes the naked. This is part of understanding what we are so grateful to Hashem for. We've got also, we talk about who girds We talk about, the idea of wearing a belt or girding loins, which again, it all comes from this thing, this first entrance to our modern day world, which is the world post-sin. So from then, that's already called the world that we all occupy. Clothes are an essential part of that. And this is all signified from the fig. Now, why was it that according to Reb Nehemiah, that it was a fig tree? What is significant about a fig tree? So any thoughts about what makes figs unique as opposed to any of the other fruits that we eat, or the 7 species, let's say? What's different about the figs as opposed to the other fruits?
Certainly the size of the leaf of the tree.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the fruit itself?
Both. I think you're right. The leaves of the tree are a very different size, definitely. But either about the tree itself or the fruit itself. Anything else that we think of that makes this a unique tree or unique fruit?
The striking thing of a fig fruit is it's full of seeds, but then so is a pomegranate.
Yes. So pomegranate we're going to look at separately. But a pomegranate, you've got a very clear distinction between what's the fruit and what's the peel, right? Whereas a fig, it's almost like the whole thing is made of seeds, similar to a pomegranate, but the whole thing is edible. You eat the peel as well. There's nothing on a fig that is not, that you're not able to consume. Compare that to grapes with their seeds, right, and the stalks. A fig is very much, the whole thing is filled with goodness. So that's one of the things about a fig. And actually, if we continue down, in Proverbs, it says, which you can see in that source, this is a Gemara from Eruvin. So if it says, he who guards the fig tree shall eat its fruit. Reb Chia bar Abba said, that Rabbi Yonasan said, what is the meaning of this phrase? And Reb Chia says, why were matters of Torah compared to a fig tree? So when it says this phrase of he who guards a fig tree shall eat its fruit, that's referring to the Torah. So it's a metaphor for Torah. In Proverbs, when it says that phrase, it says he who guards, so we're talking about he who guards the Torah shall eat the fruits of the Torah. Why were matters of Torah compared to a fig tree? So it's not just that the fig tree was the first tree which Adam and Chava ate from, but actually we have even more than that. The fig tree itself and the fig are compared to the Torah. So this is compared to the Torah. So we've got two different explanations. The first one is whenever a person searches it for figs to eat, he finds figs in it. As the figs on a tree do not ripen all at once, so that one can always find a recently ripened fig. So that as opposed to other fruits that have their seasons, apparently, I'm not I guess is it a botanist, right? I'm not an expert on this, but apparently on a fig tree, all different seasons and all different times, you'll be able to find some of the fruits ripening. So they don't all ripen at once. Rather, at any particular time when you look on the fig tree, there will be some ripe figs. Why is that comparison to the Torah? So too with the matters of Torah. Whenever a person meditates upon them, he finds in them new meaning. So it's not when you come to Torah, sometimes you'll be able to find depth and meaning in it, and sometimes you won't. Every time you approach the Torah, you're able to connect and to find the beauty within it, and to find meaning within it and depth within it. I don't know if you've ever found this, but I often find if there's a specific thing that I'm thinking about, or issue that I'm dealing with, or topic that I'm involved with, it's amazing how it always comes up with whatever Torah that we're learning. So even this idea of, we're talking about figs and clothing, we've just had the Torah portion talking about the Kohen's clothes. So it's not like you have to scratch very deep in order to find a connection. And I remember when I was learning in SEM, I remember one day I don't even remember what the different lessons were, but 5 or 6 of the lessons that we were in were all talking about the significance of a snake, but from very, very different perspectives. So one was probably in Chumash, we were looking in Bereshit and we were talking about that. Another one was talking about the snake that you put on the staff in Bamidbar. But it wasn't like the teachers had all planned the lessons together, but more, it's unbelievable how the more that you delve into the Torah, the more depth you find in it. And actually that's one of the most beautiful, or one of my favorite Mishnayot that you have in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Father, which talks about the idea of hafachba v'hafachba de kulabo. Turn it over and turn it over, because everything's in it. And it's talking about the Torah. The more that you want to understand and connect, keep digging and keep reviewing and keep reading and keep learning, and you will find everything within it. The answers to everything are within our Torah. Right? Sometimes we talk about the idea of, we've got even guidelines on which shoelace to tie first. The Torah really does contain everything. But the fig specifically is teaching us this idea of whenever you connect to the Torah, there will be something beautiful for you to be able to find within it. And that's why also when we return to the same parsha every year or to the Megillah every year, there's always going to be something that will speak to us, that will speak out to us, and that we will connect with, which is something that's really very special for us, that beauty of the Torah. And that's this idea of the fig. The other explanation, why is the Torah compared to a fig? And this is the Yalkut Shimoni. He says, rather, all fruits contain something inedible. This is what we were talking about. The dates have pips, the grapes have seeds, the pomegranates have the shell, right? So even though the pomegranate's also filled with seeds, but it has a shell. You can't eat the pomegranate peel. However, a fig is completely good to eat. Similarly, the worlds of Torah do not have anything that are unfit. And I think sometimes people will think that there's certain topics that the Torah, that we can't talk about, or that we won't talk about. But actually, there's everything within the Torah. Sometimes I say that if you imagine the most far-fetched, supernatural, far-reaching novel that you could come up with, most of the main ideas, you'll find them in the Torah as well, right? You've got calling up people from the dead. You've got the earth opening up and swallowing people. You really have everything within the Torah. But more than that, there's nothing that you're not allowed to ask within the Torah. And I think that always, comes often when we'll have challenging conversations or challenging discussions. One of the big questions is always, why do bad things happen to good people? And I think right now, obviously, that's a question that's ringing true for so many of us, and so many of us are asking, how can God allow, and all those kind of things. These are all really good questions, and I think that's what's important. I think it's important to realize that there's no such thing as a bad question. There is no such a thing as a question that we don't have a good answer for. And I think that for us, that's what's so crucial, is to realize that the questions often are so much better than the answers. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't ask the questions, right? If we reflect back when we started this process of the 7 weeks that we're going through now to Pesach, it's all about asking questions. And when you learn Torah, the best way of learning is through asking. Ask, right? Hafachba v'hafachba. Keep turning it over, because you'll find everything in it. And that's this idea of the fig. Everything in it is good, right? Everything in the Torah is good. Some of the things might be more challenging. Some of the things we don't have an answer for. We don't have the answer for right now. But keep turning and turning, and realizing that everything that you're looking for in life, you can find within the Torah. You can find guidance, you can find connection. There's so much that you can find within the Torah. I think one of the things that a lot of people are I don't know if it's the buzzword or the latest kind of thing to connect to. One of the things that we often hear about or talk about is the idea of mindfulness, right? I think mindfulness has a lot to do with kavanah. Right? Mindfulness is about being present with what you're doing. Mindfulness is being aware of what you're doing, being connected to what you're doing. And it's interesting because actually what the fig symbolizes, if we continue with the 7 Kabbalistic, let me just see actually if I can find that. Yeah, here. If we continue with the seven sphirot, the seven Kabbalistic spheres that each fruit would represent. So we had chesed, which was kindness, was to do with wheat, this idea of giving, and bread really is that central point of giving. Gevura, of holding back, to do with strength, and this idea of saying no. And the barley symbolized the mun, and the idea of boundaries, not taking too much, but getting the right balance between that. Tiferet was, last week we didn't talk about the connection of Tiferet with, which is beauty, with grapes, but that the perfect balance between this kindness and strength coming together is about Tiferet, which is beauty. The next one is Netzach, which for some reason over here is translated as victory. Any idea how you would translate Netzach?
No, sorry.
So Netzach, I would say Netzach is actually everlasting, or
Netzach, Netzachim.
yeah, like la Netzach is like forever, right? Or like not stamina, like trying to remember the word now, like continuity almost. The Netzachim, right, is like almost like the survivors, the continuation, the ability to everlasting. Remember, you just got a dictionary out for us.
My goodness, yeah, you spotted.
Go on, what have we got?
I don't know, it takes me longer to go through.
Okay, I'll give you a second. Endurance, that was the word I was looking for.
I think you've probably found them all.
So, you know, I think endurance is a good translation for it. What's interesting is that the fig is often used as a symbol for the, not just the Torah, but the Jewish people, or the land of Israel as well. Is this idea of the fig?
Eternity.
Eternity, yeah.
Yeah,
So
eternity. La Netzach, forever.
Netzach is forever.
Nitzchon, triumph, victory, win. Nitzchi, and the adjective eternal or everlasting. Eternality, yeah. That's it.
Yeah, sounds perfect. So actually, if we look at, this is one of my favorite stories, which is brought down in the Medrash Tanchuma, and it could be something that you have come across or heard in a different variation of, but this is the story goes as follows. The Roman Caesar Adrianus was once leading his troops to war to fight against a country that had rebelled against him. On the way, he came across an old man planting sprouts for fig trees. "How old are you?" asked Adrianus. 100, he replied. "You're 100 years old," said Adrianus, "and you're troubling yourself to plant fig trees. Do you think you'll live to eat from them?" "My Lord King," the man answered, "if I merit it, I'll eat from the trees. If not, just as my ancestors troubled themselves to plant for me, so I am planting for my descendants." Adrianus was away at war for 3 years. On his return, he found the old man at the same place. The old man took a small basket, filled it with the fine first fruits of figs, and came before Adrianus. He said, "My Lord King, please accept these from your servant. I am the old man that you found planting when you set out. You said to me, 'You're old. Why should you trouble yourself for others?' God has already rewarded me and let me eat the fruits of my planting. These in the baskets are for you." Adrianus said to his servants, "Take the figs from him, and reward him by filling his basket with gold coins."
So the old man wasn't Jewish?
I don't know.
Not if the fig tree was only 3 years old, perhaps he wouldn't be eating the fruit.
Very good, very good. I don't know. Maybe because he was planting sprouts. But yeah, you're right. I haven't thought into that. You're quite right. 3 years you can't eat from the fig tree. But I think there's been so much being said right now about the way we had been treating the world. I don't know, have either of you seen, just yesterday I got, somebody was telling like a bedtime story to his children about the coronavirus. I don't know if you got that on WhatsApp.
No.
But it's a really beautiful story, or if you saw it on Facebook, and he talks about, you know, the child is saying, "Please tell me about the time when the virus came," and he talks about the fact that the world was going so fast and no one had time to do the things that were important to them, and really like describing what our world was like even 2 months ago. And then suddenly this virus came, and it came with a lot of difficulty and a lot of sadness, but at the same time it meant that people slowed down and were able to appreciate life and appreciate the world and things like that. And I think this story of one of the things we've definitely all connected to is the fact that we need to look after the world that we live in. And we can talk about it till we're blue in the face, but suddenly, you know, I don't know about you, but I definitely had the feeling, even though lockdown hasn't changed, it's definitely less now than I did at the beginning. But definitely at the beginning, it was this idea of, I don't want to waste things, right? We spoke about this even, didn't we? You know, we had some milk that was starting to turn,
Yes.
and we did talk about it, didn't we? Trying to make cheese out of it. This idea of that we have this amazing world, but we're destroying it all the time as people, right? With whether it's driving our cars, whether it's throwing away mountains full of food, you know, when there are people who are starving, and suddenly you realize that actually you can make do with so much less, right? I'm sure you can all connect to this. Like, how many more different recipes or things have you tried to make that you would never normally? You would just go to the shop and buy, but actually we're trying not to go to the shop every 2 minutes, or we have to wait for our delivery, so we try and think of better ways. I mean, I can see again, some of the groups that I'm on Facebook as well, the recipes that people are suddenly trying, that you don't just buy things from a shop, let's try and make things ourselves, right? I've seen that they've run out of flour in Tesco, right? They've not run out of biscuits, that's not the issue, it's flour, because everyone's trying new recipes and to connect to homey, earthy things. How many people have made bread or made challah?
That's the problem. That's why the flour's not available, because so many more people are baking at home.
And I know, now we're running out of flour, but at least
there isn't. No. There isn't a shortage of flour. The consumption of flour by ordinary people so drastically increased that the problem is the packaging lines. There's plenty of flour, for example, to supply the commercial bakeries, but it's the packaging line for packaging flour for small people like all of us to buy can't keep up with the rate at which we want to buy flour.
Yeah, well, we had that with toilet paper a few weeks ago, so hopefully it will catch up, won't it?
Well, I noticed I had from Morrison's today, they are now saying, well, we can't, there isn't flour on the counters, but they've got flour in their their in-store bakeries. So they are now packaging flour in store and selling it.
Wonderful. But so I had on my order yesterday flour, and it didn't come. I thought it would, and it didn't come. I'm okay. We haven't run out yet. And you know what? If we don't make biscuits for one day, we'll be all right. But it is interesting how suddenly, and it's not just the flour and the cakes, is it? We're suddenly all trying to reconnect to something much more wholesome and good. And, you know, even just the different things in the environment that you're suddenly seeing without
time to look at the trees.
Yeah. And there's more birds around, and there's, you know, there's less cars and there's less planes, and it's just the world's having this chance to kind of settle a little bit. But I think that please God, things should lift, and, you know, please God, we shouldn't have this second surge that they're talking about, and please God, everyone should be well and healthy. But please God, we should also take this message with us of looking after our world. I think this idea of a 100-year-old person caring about the world, you know, you think about Captain Tom, right? The walking around his garden, and how even at the age of 100, he's still making an impact and teaching all of us a lesson on how to think of others. And this idea of this 100-year-old person planting the fig trees, and he knows in all likelihood he's not going to be around to be able to enjoy it, but just like someone before did for him, he wants to do for those who come next. And I think all of us, the more that we're able to connect to doing for others, helping others, you know, whether that is through helping somebody with their shopping, whether that is through making phone calls to someone who's lonely, whether that is through writing up our family history project for, you know, our nephews to be able to learn from, each of us in our own way can find a way to connect to this idea of netzach, which is, like you said, eternity, or this idea of continuing. What was the word that we used? This idea of endurance, right? And that really is the idea of the Jewish people enduring, right? We say Yisrael Netzach, that we are forever. But we each know that each of us ourselves won't live forever, right? Please God, Mashiach will come and then things will change. But in the reality that we're living now, we can't live forever, even if we feel that we can, right? We can't live forever, but we can be part of eternity by, and one of the main ways of doing that is by connecting to others and reaching out to others. That ensures our nitzchias. It's interesting, even I saw when I was just researching about the fig tree, there is a type of fig called a strangler fig tree. Have either of you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
What's interesting about the strangler fig tree is the way that it grows by winding itself around another tree, and eventually it literally strangles that tree till that tree dies, and then the fig tree continues to flourish and to blossom. And obviously that's it sounds like a very negative thing to be doing, but the idea of connecting to, that's, you know, we when we were talking about kindness or boundaries, we said how you can take each to the wrong extreme. Well, this is a way that you can take this idea of eternity to an extreme. Our feeling to need to kind of endure or to last forever can be something that can strangle someone. But at the same time, if we use it for the positive, our reaching out to others and growing from others and helping others to grow, that can give us this sense of nitzchias, this sense of lasting forever. And, you know, please God, that should be something that we're all able to come out of our current situation and to grow from, both looking after the world around us and the people around us and allowing them to do the same for us. And I think that that's definitely, we're already seeing how that's making us a better world. Our only hope and prayer is that this should continue, and, you know, without needing to have any more tragedies and without needing to have any more you know, the terrible heartbreak, but that we should be able to take these values and use them to continue. We're looking at, you know, on Friday is going to be VE Day. And one of the things I've been thinking of is people talk about this idea of are the changes that we're seeing in society now, are those going to last? And I'm sure that they thought the same at the end of the war. I'm sure that the feeling and the jubilation on the streets, and you look at the videos and, you know, you read the accounts of people, that sense of just everyone being one and everyone looking after each other, and people were mourning and people were heartbroken but trying to look out for each other, and the world being a good place and people caring for each other. You know, I wonder how long it took till that sense kind of faded away. And I'm sure it happened over time, till eventually we got to, you know, the world that I grew up in, and the world that we've been living until now. But we look at what we've just gone through, and it's part of history. And how do we make sure that these feelings continue, that these feelings of being there for the world around us and being there for society don't just wash away, they don't just disappear at the end of you know, the pandemic, once the world returns to whatever normal is. How do we continue with this idea of netzach, this idea of endurance, and this idea of forever? How do we make sure in our lives and in our society and in our worlds, because each of us can only change ourselves, to keep this idea going? And I'm sure each of us needs to think of our own way. You know, please God, we'll get to that point soon, but our own way of internalizing and externalizing, because it's about looking at ourselves and also around us, how to keep these changes positive but continuing. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on either that idea of netzach or on the fig in general that you wanted to share, either of you, or I hope that's given you something to think about as well.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. So
Thank you very much.
with that in mind, we will say thank you both very much for joining us.
Was my comments wrong before? Was the rule regarding 3 years?
No, I think you're right. I have to look into that.
But is that only in Israel, or is that sort of worldwide? Because if it says when you come into the land,
Yeah.
but
Oh, maybe that is it. I don't know, because it doesn't say where the Roman Caesar. It could have been in Israel. It doesn't say where he was. I'll have to look into that medrash.
Okay.
I'll have to see, because you're right. If it was within 3 years, and the only thing that I'm wondering is if the fig tree had already started growing, because it doesn't say that he planted it from a seed.
No, planting sprouts for fig trees, you might interpret that perhaps as being a small tree, a sapling.
That's what I'm wondering. So that
Yeah.
might be the only way that I could kind of think of a way out of it. But otherwise, definitely, you're right, Gary. I have to see if I can find. I have to see if there's any commentary on that.
thank you. But does the rule only apply in Israel, or is it for trees across the whole world?
I'm not sure. I'm not
Okay.
sure I mean, the law is definitely about Israel, but I think we might keep it outside of Israel as well, because I do have a recollection of not being allowed to eat from a fruit tree, but I'd have to check into that as well. I will find out for you, please, God.
Thank you.
Okay.
Lovely.
All right. Well, I hope that you both have a lovely week.
And
Thank you. You too, Shreya.
Yeah.
Enjoy. I was going to say the sunshine, but I think it's gone behind the clouds now.
It goes in and out.
Yeah. When it lasts, you should enjoy it.
Yeah, I planted various seeds. I put my tomato seeds